Good morning, awesome OCC community. I appreciate you guys. You are made in the image of God. You are loved and redeemed by Jesus, and you are filled with the Holy Spirit. Therefore, if I may, Ella, you are awesome, right? It was fun to see Alex say that he was awesome this morning. You are certainly awesome, Alex. Imagine this morning, as you were coming in, imagine if a man met you there and he gave you a seed. And then he explained to you that this was a seed from a citrus tree that was growing in his yard. And it had the most delicious fruit. The equal he's never tasted or found. And this tree has died, but during the healthy years, he harvested some seed, and he's giving you one. What would you do with that seed? With that valuable seed? Would you save it? Would you put it in a jewelry box and put it in your top drawer? And think, I know that this is the most delicious citrus. I need to save this. I need to give it to my children's children. I need to do something with it. I need to hide it away somewhere safe. Or would you risk it by putting it out there, by losing it in the soil, by putting it in some soil and seeing what happens? The Genesis story, we have Jacob, as Don said, Jacob in his last days has said to his sons, to his 12 sons, gather around, and I will tell you what will happen to you in the days to come. And so it's a blessing, but it's also a prophecy. And then he gives each one of his 12 sons, right in the middle, he says, deliver me, Lord. And I was thinking, now he was probably trying to think of all 12 sons' names and came to about the middle, and he said, oh, Lord, please help me now. But he gets to each one, and what he says to each one has some bearing on that tribe in the future, well into the future. And so he not only blesses, but he gives a prophecy about what's going to happen to that tribe. And so the 12 tribes then in the history of Israel, we've got these patriarchs. Then comes Jacob, whose name is changed to Israel, and then he has 12 sons. And they become the 12 tribes of Israel. And in the time that they're down in Egypt, they stay separate enough so they know what tribe they come from, which they were down there for 400 years. And so we know that they stayed separate because when they came out, first Moses was a Levite, we know that. And then when they came out of Egypt, when Moses led them out, what did they do? How did they travel? Well, they traveled by tribe. Remember? And there was a specific order. They camped around the tabernacle, and they traveled in a certain order with Dan as the rear guard. And then they get to the promised land, and Joshua gives an allotment of the land to each tribe. And so that you see how there's this transition from patriarchs to tribes. And that was the tension of the story in Genesis is we have these patriarchs, and we have Abraham, he has Ishmael and Isaac. The covenant doesn't go through Ishmael, it goes through Isaac. And then Isaac and Rebekah have Esau and Jacob. The covenant does not go through Esau, it goes through Jacob. And so you see, is that going to happen again? Which son is he going to choose? It seems like Joseph's his favorite early on, but then there's a change. And And so you're wondering, the tension really is, which son is he going to bless? Who's the next patriarch is what we're looking at. But there's a transition, there's a change by God's design. And Jacob picks up on it by the Spirit as he's blessing. He says to Joseph, he brings Joseph in and says, I'm going to give you one more ridge than all of your brothers. Meaning, I'm going to give land to all of your brothers in the promised land that God has promised us. So I'm going to spread this out. And so this was something that had to happen. It was really important. God's promise was Abby, land, nation, and worldwide blessing, right? The kids at Monarch know this. This is what God promised to Abraham, and then in turn promised to Isaac, and in turn promised to Jacob. Well, how's there going to be a nation if just one son is chosen, and then the others are rejected and actually become other nations? So there is this transition that had to take place, and Jacob is led to do this. And so we see this transition from patriarchs to tribes. But there is two blessings that are bigger than the others. And we looked at the last week, we looked at the blessing to Judah that was a greater blessing, and the idea and the prophecy that really one of the first messianic prophecies in the Bible, that an eternal king would come through Judah. And then this week we see a greater blessing that goes to Joseph. And so while each of the tribes get a blessing and get an allotment, the prophecy actually comes true over time, over the history of Israel, because Israel turns into two nations. Joseph, or Ephraim, or Israel, those are the names, and Ephraim was Joseph's son that got the greater blessing than his older brother Manasseh. But Ephraim becomes the big tribe in the north, and it becomes the nation of Israel. And then Judah is the tribe to the south, and they become the nation of Judah. And so it did become two nations. So you see Jacob's vision into the future. And the idea was always that it would be that it would one day be united. It was united under David and under Solomon. But after Solomon, once Solomon's son took over king of Judah, he was unkind to Ephraim, to the northern kingdom, and it split. And it was split from then on. And Assyria wiped out the northern kingdom. Babylon exiled Judah, and then the Persians allowed them to return. But there was always this idea, and that's Jesus came in with the nation being Judah, and the Samaritans being a mix of the Assyrians would take in other nations and mix them in. And so that's what the Samaritans were. They were once Ephraimites. They were of the northern kingdom, but the Assyrians had mixed them with other races. And so that's what Jesus walked into. And he walked into this idea, this dream of the Messiah, that there would be a king like David who would then unite all the people. As promised, there would be this king from Judah that would rule the whole world, that would unite Israel and then rule the whole world. And so that's what Jesus walked into as far as the expectation of the Messiah. And so he had to teach them. He had to make clear to the disciples. At this moment, just before this, Peter says, well, who am I, you guys? Who do you say I am? Who do people say I am? And they said, prophet, Elijah, John the Baptist. And he said, well, who do you? And we talked about that's an answer all of us have. That's something we all have to answer. Who Jesus says to us, who am I to you? And we all have to answer. And so as soon as Peter says, you're the Messiah, this promised one that goes all the way back to this blessing that Jacob gives Judah, that out of your tribe, Judah, will come a king, a lion. And the scepter will never be taken from between his feet. He will rule forever and ever. And so so as soon as Peter said that, and then Jesus really confirmed it by saying, all right, don't tell anyone, because you never say that unless it's the truth. Okay, don't tell anyone. No one says that when it's not correct. But he was really saying don't tell anyone because they didn't have an understanding of what the Messiah really is, what the Messiah's mission was, the Messiah's mission. And so he had to take that time to speak to the disciples and say, I know what your expectation is, that this king will rise up. And they even, in the Gospels, tried to make Jesus king at one point after he fed the masses miraculously. I'm not going to become this king that you think I am, that's going to unite Israel, that's going to revolt against Rome, that's going to then rule all the world the way you think it's going to happen. And so he's spending this time explaining to the disciples what is the Messiah's true mission. And what does he say? What is the Messiah's mission? As soon as they say, Peter says, you're the Messiah, and Jesus confirms it, and he says immediately, well, let me tell you what the Messiah's mission is. I am going to go to Jerusalem. The leaders are going to put me on the cross and kill me, and in 3 days I will rise again. And so he makes it very clear. As soon as they realize he's the Messiah, well, here's what the Messiah's mission is, and it is the cross. And of course, that's completely opposite of what they were expecting. And then he tells them and us that your mission in following me is the cross as well. And he says this, and I want to make some points on what that mission is for us as the cross. I want you to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. And there's so much there, and we're really spending the rest of our lives trying to figure out exactly what that means and what that means for us being disciples. But I do have some points that I want to make on that. And then he says this really paradoxical statement that you see here that's Mark 8:35. I mean, if you heard this just makes no sense. It's a complete paradox. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. Does that make any human logical sense to any of us? If you want to make some money, throw it away. But, if you want to save money, throw it away or give it away. And you think, that's not the way it works. That doesn't make any sense to us. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. And so that is our challenge. And I'm not trying to remove any tension from this in making some points on it, or the mystery of it, because we have to enter into that paradox. In knowing God and following Jesus is to often relax in the tension. We're not going to fully understand God, and so we have to understand that and accept His mystery. And accept that we're not going to fully understand it. But Jesus does help us out in John. When he's saying this, he gives us the idea of the seed, the kernel of wheat. And he says, unless the seed goes into the ground and dies, it only remains just a single kernel. If it dies and enters into the ground, then it becomes many, many seeds. And so that's really the idea. That's the idea I wanted to get into your mind about this about the seed, the man with the citrus tree. I was thinking of my grandfather there and some of his citrus in the bet that he had with his neighbor who said, you can't grow a citrus tree out of a seed. You have to use rootstock. It just won't work. And so my grandfather takes some dirt, puts it in a can, puts the seed in there, and it starts to grow, and he plants it in between him and his neighbor's house, and it grew up into the biggest grapefruit tree, and probably still there today. It was the one citrus tree that lasted. But in our life, we're given seeds. We're given a seed. We're given opportunities. And are we going to try to save that? God gives us something special. He gives us a gift. He gives us the gift of time. He gives us the gift of relationships. He gives us opportunities and chances, which is really every day, isn't it? Are we going to take that and stick it away somewhere safe? Are we going to try to save it under our own power and protection in our own plan? Is that what we're going to do? Or are we going to take a risk? Are we going to lose it, as it were, by putting it in the soil? Are we going to let go of it? Are we going to let God have this and then see what blessings can come from it? It's really an everyday experience, isn't it? I know I know most of you have done this in giving your life to Jesus. But then every day we're following him, and we have to do this. We have to give something to him. We have to die in some way. We have to deny self and take up the cross and follow him. It happens all the time. It was this Friday, we were... Murray and I are not we're very involved at Monarch. We're not super involved at Howard, which is where Mary Reed goes to school. And so we're absentee parents on that one, we have to admit. And so we say, Murray's like, I really want to go. They're having this fundraiser. Let's go to this thing. And I'm kind of like, I don't know if you can relate with me, but I'm like, nah, who cares? And then I'm like, I was being nice, and I said, okay, sure, let's do that. But then on Friday night, there's this soccer league, and the guy that runs the league knows me, and he said, hey, we've got somebody sick. Do you mind coaching for me for one of the teams? And I said, sure. So I'm in my shorts and soccer shoes, and I'm coaching a game. Then we watch Noah play, and Murray says, okay, let's go to the fundraiser. And I'm like, look at me, I'm in shorts, and she said, let's just go. And so at that moment, I quit trying to save my seed of that evening or whatever I thought I was going to do, and just let it go. And I threw it into the ground. I let it die. My own personal wants and needs and desires, fears or whatever it is, anxiety of going to some fundraiser where I don't know anybody because I'm not an involved parent at that school. And Murray's like, shut up about that. Murray's like, don't drag me under the bus. You can leave it on your own. So and then we go, and then it was one of those moments where I end up in a couple conversations, and we live in a great place where you pretty much can't go anywhere without knowing anybody if you've been here a while. Orlando is special in that way. There's just lots of connections. And so I end up in a couple conversations where I just get this sense that this is where I'm supposed to be right now. This is where God wants me for tonight. And then there's joy in it. We had a good time, and Murray said, that was fun, wasn't it? And I'm like, okay, yeah, it was. It was fun. We had a good time. And it was in it, and that's just a really small example of what can happen when we do. put that seed, that opportunity that we've been given, and we let our part of it die, and we put it into the universe, into God's hands, into the soil, and see what happens, see what God is going to grow. And I want to say also, when we look at, this is almost always one of my points, we look at this passage of take up your cross and follow me, and we immediately think sackcloth, ashes, self-whipping and such. I mean, we just immediately kind of go to this dark place of, oh, for me to take up my cross and follow Jesus, deny myself, that means I have to, that's shaming. I need to live in shame. I need to, it just kind of puts us in this dark place, which we naturally want to get away from. And I think that instinct is good, and I think we have the complete wrong idea of what taking up the cross, denying self and taking up the cross really achieves and really is, and what the mission of it is. It is not about shame. In fact, Jesus addresses that right away. He addresses the subject of shame. He says, don't be ashamed of me. He says it actually very clear. If you're ashamed of me, then I'm going to be ashamed of, if you're ashamed of me in your realm, in the world, in your time, then I'm going to be ashamed of you when you come to heaven in front of the angels. It's a very stern warning. We often take that as in the wrong way too, and we think, oh, that means I have to, that means I can't be embarrassed about the gospel, so I'm going to just charge ahead when there's not really an opportunity and it's socially awkward, and I'm just going to charge ahead. And please don't do that. Do that if the Holy Spirit. Otherwise, what we come across as is nervy, socially awkward people. And we're not. What are we? We're awesome, is what we are. And God will give you plenty of opportunities to share His glory and His gospel. Do it within the joy, not out of obligation or, well, I'm not going to be shamed. And I balance this off with you need to be proud, okay? But what Jesus, the point is, Jesus is saying, listen, it's not about shame. Taking up your cross and following me, denying yourself, is not about you shaming yourself or anybody else. One of my favorite verses, Tom knows this one too. You know where I'm going, right, Tom? Hebrews, say it, Tom. You got it? For the joy of the shame, for the joy of the cross, took up the cross, sit at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. Right. Why did Jesus die on the cross? For the joy set before him, is what Hebrews 12:2. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame. Okay? Why? What is taking up the cross and following Jesus about? It's not about shame. He scorned the shame. It's about the joy, right? It is about the joy. This is what we find this time and time again. I was trying to protect my evening and myself, and I didn't want, to feel underdressed and whatever. And then that was my own shame, and God took it away and gave me joy. See, because that's what our self is, our self becomes, and when we do things under our own power, that's when the shame and fear and anxiety comes in. And when we let that die, when we let God have that, when we put it on the cross, He returns it with joy. For the joy set before him, he endured this cross, scorning its shame, and then he sat down at the right hand of the throne of the Father in heaven. So it is not, please, it is not about shame when we're talking about picking up our cross. It is all about joy. It is an experience of joy. And then what we find is we find abundant blessings. And this is exactly Joseph's story. Joseph is a perfect example of this. So is Jesus. Both of them. The connection between these two passages is you have prophecy in Genesis of what's going to happen to these tribes, and then you have Jesus prophesying about what's going to happen to him in the future. And that whole trip is for both of them, for Jesus and for Joseph, is self-denial, taking up the cross, and then they find joy in abundant blessings. Joseph did not volunteer to go down to Egypt. We know that. That was a forced decision. He found himself as a slave down in Egypt. But what we do see from Joseph, and like I said, the narrator doesn't give us a whole lot of internal dialogue with Joseph, but what we do see from his behavior, we see that he accepted that. He accepted it. He did take up his cross and denied self and understood that this is what God's will is. I don't understand it at all, but this is what God's will. And you see it in his faithfulness. You see it that he ends up in the house of Potiphar, and what does he do? He works with great faithfulness, and God blesses him. And so next thing you know, Potiphar's like, you're in charge of everything. And you see it in his self-denial, and he has a chance to have a short-term pleasure or a feeling of conquering or selfishness, lust, with Potiphar's wife, and he turns down that opportunity and says, how could I do something like that against God? Then he finds himself in prison, and again, doesn't wallow in shame and fear and anxiety. He just starts working. The warden says, obviously you're blessed by God. He's just being faithful. And then he's caring for everyone there. He's in charge. He's now in charge of the prison. He's caring for everyone. In caring for everyone, then he interprets the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker in noticing their face. Why is your face down today? I mean, that's someone who is not self-concerned. When we're self-concerned, we're blind to anybody and whatever they're thinking or feeling. We could care less. And so he was living that life of denying self and just following Jesus, following the Spirit. And so he did that, and he lived in faithfulness. And then you see these abundant blessings. God provides a way out of the prison for him. God gives him a wife, gives him 2 sons. God reconciles him, brings his brothers right to his feet, bowing before him. And brings the reconciliation opportunity right to him, brings his father to him. And so you see all these abundant blessings that come when you do this. So it's not about shame. It's not about self-flagellation. It's taking up the cross. It is about denying yourself and trusting God and taking that seed, taking that opportunity and letting it die, as in letting it out of your hands, putting it in the soil, allowing God to have it. And each day, if we do this, it will change. Ella's talking about change in perspective. If we look at each day like this, we will have days full of joy. Not, hey, I have my list of things to do. Now, we have to be responsible, for sure. But just saying, God, what do you have for me today? I'm going to give this day to you today. And see what's going to happen. Those are going to be days full of joy and days full of blessing. Listen to this blessing. This is Genesis 49:24 through 26. Because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because of the shepherd, the rock of Israel, because of your father's God who helps you, because of the Almighty who blesses you with blessings of the heavens above, blessings of the deep that lies below, blessings of the breast and womb. Your father's blessings are greater than the blessings of the ancient mountains than the bounty of the age-old hills. So we're going to have, Tom's going to come up and we're going to have an opportunity to hear from you. What's your story of giving something up, giving something away, and then finding joy in return?